Everybody, it's Swedenborg Live. Welcome. Good to see you again. It's been a little while. Who am I? Curtis Childs, and I will be your host tonight, where we're going to be taking questions for the whole hour live from the audience, whatever's on your minds, and I'm going to be backed up by a panel of Swedenborg experts, and we begin our introductions with my good friend and Latin consultant for the New Century Edition, Cara Dom. Cara, how are you?
Hi, Curtis. Lovely to be here. Thanksgiving's my favorite holiday, and this time of year is just lovely. So I'm all happy and ready to chat with people.
So that's good. You'll be in a good mood. You won't snap at the people who write questions in, as per usual.
I had enough mashed potatoes. I'll be happy for a long time.
Okay, and then joining us is Swedenborg Foundation's Vice President of Publishing, Chelsea Odner. Welcome, Chelsea. How are you?
Hi, Curtis and Cara. I'm good, and I'm glad to be here. It's been a while, it feels like, and it's fun to be celebrating Giving Tuesday with everybody, but especially just getting to have the give and take of people asking questions and us sharing our thoughts hopefully it helps.
That's a great segue into Giving Tuesday, because that's what's going on. Tomorrow is Tuesday. We're getting a jump on the season by doing our Giving Tuesday show. If you don't know what Giving Tuesday is, this is something that started 7 years ago, where there's a day where everybody gets together and celebrates good causes and not-for-profits that make the world a better place. This is something that's spread all over the world. There's been hundreds of millions of dollars raised by all kinds of organizations, and each year we want to get in on that. We are a not-for-profit. The Swedenborg Foundation wouldn't exist without your generous contributions. So if you feel like you want us to be able to do what we do, the translation work that the NCE team does, the videos that you see on Off the Left Eye, to have a voice like the voice we have out in the world, if you want to be a part of that, make a donation. Go to offthelefeye.com/donate. We have a goal tonight of $1,000 to raise. We're off to a good start because we had a generous anonymous donor couple sponsor the show. So they made a $250 gift. So we're already basically all the way there. Plus, they made another $250 gift as a matching gift. So the first $250, if you come in right now and donate $10, they'll match it with a 10 out of that. So your money goes twice as far, and that's great. So, offthelefteeye.com/donate. Thank you so much. Obviously, none of this could happen without the support that all of you have been giving over the years. Let's see what you got. This very first question is from Anonymous. And it says, with all the crypto drama lately, cryptocurrency, for those of you who aren't familiar, you see many people posting or saying that crypto is the 666 mark of the beast on the hand and forehead from Revelation. What do you think of that? So in the book of Revelation, there is this famous passage about the mark of the beast. And it says it's the number 666. And people have been looking since that was written for, what does that mean? What is the mark of the beast? And people will look at things that are happening in the world and say, is this the mark of the beast? Is it some kind of identifier? Swedenborg would assert that that part of the Bible, like all the Bible, isn't concerned with physical things that come and go, like a mark, a physical mark on your physical hand. It's concerned with things that are eternally true and apply to everyone all the time across human history. And specifically about 666, we have a short clip that focuses on the number 666 here. And 666, because of the way it's composed as a number, happens to mean all evil and falsity. So everything bad and everything that's not true taken together. Or on the flip side, all goodness and all truth. Because everything has a positive and negative correspondence. So the reason that is that the number 6 is built out of two other numbers, 3 and 2, if you multiply them together. 2 having to do with goodness, and 3 having to do with truth. And in the reverse, evil having to do with 2, and falsity having to do with 3. And so if you put those together, and then put 3 of them next to each other, 3 being this number that also signifies all, especially if something is tripled, it means all. This is a little correspondential numerology for you. That is how it means the mark of the beast, the sign of the devil is the evil and falsity that composes the devil. And then the sign of the human is 666 in the positive sense, which is all goodness and all truth, because ultimately God is the only human. So there's that, but there's more. He mentions it in a number of places. Cara or Chelsea, do you have any further thoughts on it?
Yeah, so it's interesting to think about. I was looking into what Swedenborg writes about the forehead, because it says the mark is on the forehead and on the hand, but so the forehead, like sort of like that 666, Swedenborg writes it's a symbol of the highest love, like celestial love is what Swedenborg says, heavenly love. But then it can also mean, like you're saying, evil, the lowest evil. And so it's interesting that, even in the Bible, it talks about the mark of the Lord and having that be right on your forehead. And that's this, Swedenborg even says that's this protection from evil, because love is protection from evil. And so that it's interesting to contrast the mark of the Lord with the mark of the beast. And it makes me think of like the beast, kind of like I almost think of like the snake, how it's told that it needs to go along the ground, it's going to be this, this most like external thing. So there's this sort of, connection there between the mark of the Lord as love, and then the mark of the beast as like everything that isn't of God, which is really anything that disconnects you from love. And we all have this tendency to think externally, to think according to appearances, to get sort of lost in the way things look rather than really, connecting into a loving perspective on things. And that I feel like that propensity to get so caught up in that we lose touch with love. And that's what Swedenborg says is even like, you live it, your life is just completely detached from love. That's the mark of the beast, is when you're really kind of totally lost in that. And that's definitely a sad state to be in. And it would be great to have everybody find their way to connect with love.
Yeah, and the other part of that verse didn't say it was on the forehead and the hands.
And the hands.
And the Swedenborg says the hands mean power, like that. That's how we do anything in life, with our hands. And so to take in one passage I'm looking at, it says that 666 symbolizes every truth in the word having to do with goodness. So imagine taking that good correspondence and putting it into our hands, putting it into our life, just using that to have power in our lives for the people around us. That could be the mark, the good mark.
I love it. Those are some awesome angles on that. And I love that there's a dark and a light side to it, as it seems to be with everything in the way Swedenborg describes the world. So there's nothing that we can't venture into and look at how can we turn this into something that's good. So thank you, Cara and Chelsea, for that. I want to say thanks to John, who, while we were there talking about the crypto and the 666, made a contribution. So now we're up to 350 raised. We are getting there, and that will go twice as far when we apply our matcher at the end. Okay, let's see what the next question is. What's it going to be? Matthew Bush. Hey, Matthew. In Arcana Celestia, 1675. All right, specific number. And as at that time, representatives came forth into actual realization. Can you explain how that took place? So, Cara, you had looked up some context when we saw this in our queue. What's the story behind this line?
Roughly, it's talking about all the fighting going on between different kingdoms and tribes and stuff. The Horites, and something about Edom and Esau, and the point is, I think, Matthew, that that Matthew's asking, because Swedenborg makes the claim that all these historical stories in the Word that actually did happen on this earth are actually representative of our spiritual journey, of Jesus's spiritual journey while he was here on earth. So that is a biggie. And what does Matthew say? How did it happen? Explain how that took place. I don't know. I don't know how every historical fact in the Bible could also have this meaning. And all I can think of is that the Lord God is playing a mighty long game and thinking real long term about our spiritual welfare. But maybe Chelsea or Curtis has a better idea about how God accomplished such an amazing thing.
Well, yeah, I have a better idea. I think he was just like thinking real long term about our spiritual welfare. You know? Like it's like the obvious answer. I don't know how you missed it. No, I love that. And I would just, what came to mind when you were saying that was that Swedenborg talks at one point about how even the roll of a dice is affected by providence. That providence is in every least detail. So it must be that providence can, when necessary, bring about certain effects that can fit the pattern of what was happening on the earth to the pattern of what needed to happen to create the Word. Chelsea, do you have any further thoughts?
Yeah, there was a podcast episode we did, I can't remember which one it was, but where Jonathan was talking about sharing this amazing, this story from it was one of the NCE spotlights, because he was reading a quote about when Swedenborg writes about in the Word, when the bear comes out of the woods and kills a few people or something like that. And Swedenborg says that bear coming out of the woods, like, really happened and was one of these, everything being aligned so that what was actually happening had a spiritual correspondence, or like it was just like, otherwise that wouldn't have happened or something. And it's a little bit mind-boggling to think like, wait, what? To try to connect, like, how does that make sense with just our everyday things? But it does just leave me with a sense of wonder and curiosity and this like potential, I guess. Like, I guess the takeaway message for me is that like there is a spiritual world, there is a spiritual narrative going on that we are a part of, and there's maybe sort of kind of an infinite, nuance and meaning. I mean, it's just really, it kind of reminds me of what Swedenborg says about spiritual language, like that angels can just say one thing and that word or phrase has just this like infinite depth and even visualizations and all this kind of stuff. It's like, it's like looking at anything under a microscope or on the atomic level. It's like there is so much packed in there. How do we know there's not a ton of sort of miraculous spiritual things going on, or sort of the meaning and providence like you guys are describing? So I'm just sort of left with wonder rather than necessarily explanation for how that works.
Yeah.
That's great. I think maybe I mentioned this on this show before, that my grandfather, when he was getting close to dying, said to somebody, "Oh, the nurses are doing their representations."
The who?
And he was very, very into Swedenborg's writings and knew of this, and so he was it seems like to him that he was saying, oh yeah, everything that even these nurses walking around were doing had some kind of, as you were saying, Chelsea, like this, there's some spiritual meaning there of whatever kind. It's cool to think about that everything, that there is, and I guess a concept that might be useful to people who aren't familiar with it to understand this is that Swedenborg says that the entire physical world is responsive to the spiritual world. So everything that's happening here all the time is in sort of a chain of consequences that flows through the spiritual world into the physical world. So it wouldn't be that suddenly God pulled strings behind the scenes to make these things happen and usually never does that and didn't afterwards. It's always the spiritual world and the physical world are hand in glove and things ripple across both. So this would just be some kind of particular guiding of that or something.
Yeah, well, and what you're making me think of too, because this is what Swedenborg says of like, I was mentioning language, but he says our own thoughts, like that we, if he says if we could even understand sort of like the inner tendrils of an individual thought, and then like the love that's connected to, and then all the spiritual societies that's connected to, there's just like infinite things inside everything, everything you just think. And I guess like, we're aware of how amazing it is that our bodies are this intricate, complex system that produces consciousness for us. It's like there is just because we're, even if we can allow for the idea that there's just this depth of spiritual reality at play in our lives, it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a burden to our consciousness to have to figure it all out, or like, no, oh wait, I'm missing, maybe I'm missing half the picture. Of course you are, we get this much of the experience. The rest is like, we're being carried, we're just, and that's okay. You can kind of let go and just know that, it's going to be okay. Because otherwise it can just seem like, oh wait, am I missing something? Like major FOMO if you're like, oh my gosh, all this spiritual reality that I don't get to understand and know about. But
yeah,
it's okay. Okay.
Everybody else figured out what was cool about this moment except me.
Yeah, exactly.
It'd be like if
all the spiritual meaning.
Yeah, if I learned more about digestion and I was like, oh, now that I've eaten, I better make sure that there's so much going on there in the body that it's
like, no.
None of my business. None of my business. Even if I've heard the vague details about it, things work, and that's just the way that we always have to be. Is we're inhabiting even just our body, which is just infinitely more complex than we could ever comprehend. Okay, cool. We'll go with it.
Right. There's some way to work in harmony with it, even while being sort of humble to our ignorance.
Yeah, that's right. It's this amazing partnership of. Like you definitely affect your body, and you can definitely do things that are pretty good for it, even though the things that you do are so simplistic compared to the things that it does on its own.
Yeah.
They get along. It's got to be a picture of the finite human being and the infinite divine.
Mm-hmm.
Man, speaking of infinite, there's been so many donations during this question. Okay, let me just
what does it all mean?
Scroll up my notifications here. Thank you, everybody. 25 from Anonymous. Thank you so much. We got a gift from Gail of 100. Thank you so much. Then Christopher made a donation. Appreciate it. Richard. Thank you, Richard. Jean. Hope I'm saying that right. Made a gift. Then you think I'm done? No. These ones haven't even been written yet. We got a donation from JP. You'll see. It'll come in soon, and I actually have another two in my queue, but I'll wait till they pop up here and I'll tell you about them. Let's go to the next question. Thank you, everyone. We're like zooming up towards our goal. Stephen Terzik, does Swedenborg say anything about the 7 sins? How does he define a sin? The 7 deadly sins. Is that a Catholic thing? And they are. I'll see if I know any of them. Pride. Greed, sloth, gluttony. That's
Probably.
it. I think I have 4. Do you know what they are?
Is lust maybe one of them?
Lust.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Say Swedenborg doesn't talk about the 7 deadly sins. He just talks about
wrath is another one.
Oh, okay.
And then
he talks about the 10 commandments. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. That's right. I don't think he's ever talked about the 7 deadly sins, but he'll certainly talk about. He loves having these big long lists of sins, where he says people who are cruel and he'll often list things like that. But I would say he does have a definition for sin.
I got one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Well, at the very end of the last book he wrote, True Christian Religion, or True Christianity, he talks about how everybody has a concept of what evil is. And the evil that is sinful, he says, is simply evil against our neighbor. And evil against our neighbor is also evil against God, which is what sin is. That's his definition of sin.
Yeah.
Nice.
I love that. Because I think that a qualm people will have with religion is you get so hung up about stuff that doesn't really have to do with actual kindness and compassion. But there you're saying what evil is sinful is the evil that's against your neighbor. And that's against God. And my new favorite quote from Swedenborg is in Heaven and Hell. He says, "The divine intent is that everyone be most fully and profoundly happy."
Nice.
That's God's intent, and as we know from the beginning of Divine Love and Wisdom, the book, we are what we love. We are our intent. So God is the desire that everyone be most fully and profoundly happy. So anything that's working against that is a sin against God.
Yeah.
Yeah. The clarification for me that was coming to my mind, that I don't have a quote handy, so maybe you guys can help me out here in terms of this idea, but I feel like I found it helpful what I've learned in Swedenborg about like evil is not the same as a sin. And that's like what you're saying, Kara, I think in that quote, like we can have evil in us that is not sinful, like because we are like evil is kind of just this almost like an inert matter, you could say, because it's just like anything that is not God, is the absence of love and truth. So you're left with evil and falsity. And so Swedenborg says, we are all evil, or born into evils of every kind and all that stuff, because we just have that propensity in our nature to live as if we're separate, from God, or live disconnected from love and truth, even if we never totally lose that connection inside. And so we have hereditary evil, all that kind of stuff, but it becomes sin when it's like we are willfully and with intention living out some evil, for that is harm, to harm other people and, whatever, like Kara was saying, against the neighbor and against God, is like there's, that Swedenborg says that sin, the evil is appropriated to us, like it becomes sinful when we're acting with this intention. And we're choosing it, otherwise it's just sort of the mixed bag that we get being here, and we can make space for all that confusion. But just because you sort of have it in you doesn't mean you are of it, that's part of the equilibrium that we have to have, Swedenborg says, is this evil and goodness. But so it's the sin is kind of the distinction when it's like we are actively and willfully choosing it, and making it of our heart.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned choosing, because you were talking about what becomes part of us. And the only thing that becomes a part of you is what you do in freedom. And freedom has to do with you do things because you want to. Because you could have somebody who, let's say there was some kind of warlord who told you have to go and hurt someone or else I'm going to kill you and your family. That's not you choosing to do something against a neighbor in freedom. So that I would think that's very different spiritually than if you just say, hey, they have something I want, I'm going to go mug them or something. And so I'm sure there's a whole spectrum of mitigating circumstances, and you can never know exactly what's going on in someone. So
yeah.
Can I say one more thing about sin?
Yeah, you know what? We're here to talk about sin. Let's do it.
Yeah.
I just remember one time when I was reading through Swedenborg's book, Divine Providence, I was stunned at how many times he said that shunning evil, so shunning, turning away from, turning your back on, avoiding evil as a sin against God. So that just means something in opposition of what God stands for, is the key to everything wonderful. It's the key to love. It's the key to happiness. It's the key to heaven. It's the key to charity and goodwill and all the good stuff. Just turn your back on the stuff that's, isn't God-like,
Yeah.
So that's the stuff that's loving and helpful and, truthful and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, it just really struck me as I was reading through that book for a couple of months, like, wow, Swedenborg seems to think that's going to solve all our problems. If all we do is shun evil as sin against God.
Yeah. I think I was reading recently that the church begins inside of you as soon as you start to do that. That's
Right.
really what being religious is I guess the first time when you say, and it has to be something that you believe to be something that's not good, and you say, hey, even though, and I was just reading True Christianity 2, where he says the way you can combat it is to say, hey, there's this thing, I am intending to do this thing and I want to do it, but because I believe that it's sin, I'm not going to do it. That's a part of it. Knowing like, yeah, I would love to do this thing, but I'm not going to do it. There's power in that because you're saying,
Yeah.
I'm gonna deny a bit of my will because I know this will cause harm. That's when you've really got skin in the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Hey, speaking of skin in the game, we've had a bunch of new donations come in. Thank you, everybody. So I said JP. We had Steve make a donation. Thank you so much, Steve. Amy made a contribution. Thank you, Amy. Appreciate it. Michael made a gift. Thank you for helping us do what we do. Then we had Stephen. Thank you, Stephen. Catherine made a gift. And then Christy. So we are up to $925 on this Giving Tuesday's Eve. Thank you, everyone. I think now's a good time for us to, before we take the next question, to give a little back to all of you. It's time for our mid-show raffle. Da-na-na-na-na. This raffle is
Maybe someday we can afford sound effects.
This is I'm in a union and they said we can only use my sound effects. So so this is, we're picking 3 winners this time. And this is out of the pool of everybody who's donated in October and November. So thank you if you've made your contribution. So we had a computer program pick 3 winners randomly for us, and they all win different things. And here is who it is, and here is what they got. Okay, congratulations, raffle winners. Chris Pitcairn got both issues of the wonderful Passages magazine that our own Chelsea, who's in this panel, headed up development of. Then we have Donna, who won volumes 3 and 4 of Secrets of Heaven, who I'm sure there was some consulting on those done by Cara, who's here. And then Desiree won a community membership, which means that she gets access to all kinds of cool stuff that anyone else can get if they just sign up to be a member of the Swedenborg Foundation. So thanks to everybody and congratulations. All right, so I'm just getting word that actually we picked those winners not just from October and November, but the entire year. That was a whole year. So if one of those people is like, I didn't donate in October and November, why am I? It's because we appreciate the gifts going all the way back to the beginning of the year. Before that, no, I'm just kidding. We appreciate all donations for all time. They let us do what we're doing. Okay, next question. Let's see what's going on here. This is from Shelley Hill. Does Swedenborg teach that the spirit leaves after 3 days or immediately upon death? If the spirit lingers, what is the person experiencing in this in-between time? Do we hang around after the body dies, or are we out of here? Well, I don't know. What do you think? Because I feel like, I mean, he talks about there's somewhere in his writings where it talks about 3 days.
Yeah. It's somehow that we, quote unquote, wake up
Yeah.
in the spiritual world after 3 days. I imagine, I mean, we have that beautiful video about angels taking care of us when we die and what happens after death. And I just picture it as that state that that he talks about, that the first place we go when we die is into the company of the highest angels, the most loving angels, the angels closest to God. And we hang around in kind of an unconscious state. I picture it as sort of a bath of unconditional love. That's how I picture it.
Yeah.
And I picture that that's kind of what's happening for that 3 days before we sort of come to our senses again. But is that, I feel like Swedenborg talks about that. But
yeah. It's one of the funny things where it's like where Swedenborg uses a integer of time, to describe a spiritual process. So we're just sort of left to scratch our heads a little bit. Because I think, and what we were just talking about earlier with that question of the correspondence of like, maybe there's some physical representation of what is spiritually happening, so like there is maybe something to those 3 earth days, after a person dies. But Swedenborg just says that the number 3 symbolizes completion, what is fullness. And so that, the completed process is what happens. And then the person, comes to consciousness in the spiritual world. And so I wonder, time is so relative. It's really, I'm curious about that. Definitely some people, there are just lots of experiences that people report of feeling a connection to a loved one really, really soon after they passed, or like having an experience of a person appearing to them at the time, so it's like, it doesn't necessarily seem like we sort of go offline for 3 earth days necessarily, but, Swedenborg just does describe this transition time where, like Cara was saying, we connect to the highest love, and then our consciousness sort of comes into focus in the spiritual world and we wake up there. So I kind of focus on the 3 and just think this is it fully is happening. There is a full transition. There's a complete process of the spirit coming out of the body and waking up in its spiritual body. So.
Yeah, you're making me think of how Swedenborg says that people won't spend more than 30 years in the world of spirits. And obviously, it's not 30 revolutions of the world around the sun, because it's in spiritual time, but he'll give this, as you said, this physical equivalent. But now that you're mentioning 3 meaning completion, maybe 30 is some kind of completion representation number. Yeah. And when Swedenborg describes the dying process that this channel got its name from, when he has this experience, he says, it seems like there's a covering pulled off my left eye. When he goes into that love bath that you're talking about, I don't think, he doesn't give any indication that he hung around for days before then. So it seems like you can, and obviously people who have near-death experiences, they can be only clinically dead for a minute or 2, but they're having these huge experiences within it. So it is a grand mystery. It could be that when we're really making our transition, there's some kind of, everything's getting set up just right, so it can take a little longer. I'm thinking also of the story Swedenborg reported where he was talking to people who had died, and I can't remember how long, it was 2 days after they died, and their funeral was going to happen, and he said, you're going to get buried. And they said, we're not getting buried. It's our bodies that are getting buried. I sort of feel like that happened within 3 days. So there you go. There's a few other musings. Mm-hmm. I got to say something. About Carla. Thank you, Carla, for making a contribution. We have met our goal. We did it. Yeah. Oh, sound effects.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then and then
Worth it.
after that was done, Donna made a contribution as well. So thank you so much, Donna. Thank you, everyone. You can still make a contribution by going to offtheleft.com/donate, and all that comes in does help us do what we did. But you got us to our goal. Thank you so much. Okay, let's do another question. Why not? Gordon Ramsay says, "What does Swedenborg say about King Solomon? A wise king who paradoxically was wealthy through heavy taxation and has many wives. I suppose Solomon represents truth without goodness?" Excellent. So we've got King Solomon, who seems like he's a protagonist in the Bible. I mean, a lot of things refer back to him. He was said to be so wise, but is he really living the kind of life that we should be living? What's he all about? Do you, Cara or Chelsea, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, just sort of some general thoughts about people in the Bible that Swedenborg writes about is like they all are actors that are, like we said earlier, I guess, serving sort of a representative role in the story. So it's sort of an allegory there, and but so much so that a figure can mean different things based on the context that they're in, who they're with, so from one chapter to the next, you might have a figure, a person who is representing different things. I'm sort of thinking of like King Nebuchadnezzar, who's just sort of this like prideful king, but then he prophesies and is like the epitome of somebody, being sort of filled with the divine spirit. And anyway, so that's through and through is sort of Swedenborg. There might be like a predominant representation or like correspondence for a person in the Bible, but then it can shift based on the context of what's going on. So with my sense, although like I'm not brushed up on it, is that Solomon would be one there. It's such a big figure and has so many different parts to the story that my sense would be that you might go into, where Swedenborg writes about it, and you might be finding him saying different things. But what's in my mind, I want to credit one of Jonathan Rose's Bible studies, and I even composed a song on this whole idea called Time to Seek, that there's this awesome dynamic in the correspondence between David and Solomon, and this like having to so Solomon, the name itself means peace, but like, so there's our earthly self that just like toils and struggles and works its poor little heart out to try to make good things happen, like try to get the fire of love to kindle in our hearts. But the truth is that earthly self just really can't do it, but its effort is important and useful. But Swedenborg says that like our spiritual lives go through phases where that has to be the dominant thing for a while, but eventually that ends and our spiritual selves come to reign within us. That's Solomon. And so that's when we've really kind of our spiritual selves, our inner selves have like awakened. Anyway, then we it's not this, it's almost like we thought we had to create it or like had to build it up, but actually it's just a surrender of that earthly self, and the inner self, the spiritual self, comes in and knows how to live from love, has this connection to wisdom and goodness. And so that story of the change of who's in charge, that Solomon is the one who has to build the house for the Lord, is that transition of like that earthly self is going to, pull together all the funds it can, but really it can't be the one. It's a completely shift to the spiritual level when we are actually living in sort of the second phase, if you will, of our spiritual growth. Am I saying that right? Am I saying David and Solomon? For some reason, I haven't thought about it in a while, but it is David, right? I hope I'm not completely.
All David Solomon. I mean,
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Saul, David, Solomon. Right. So it's David. Right. I have the lyrics in my head from my song.
But like, what good fortune that we got a question about something that you've written a song about.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I like packed that whole story into the lyrics. It was intense, but it was good.
Yeah, oh, that's great. How many songs have there really been written about the internal sense of David to Solomon?
David and Solomon.
Um,
Probably the only one, but you can find it on Spotify.
Yeah,
Time to Seek.
yeah. When I go to my David to Solomon playlist on Spotify, what's it called? What's that song called?
It's just that song. Time to Seek.
Okay.
time to seek. Beautiful.
I want to say thank you to Kay. Kay made a very generous $500 donation. And so now we're like way, way above our thermometer. Thank you, everyone. This means a ton to us from the whole team. Really appreciate everyone and their generosity tonight. Thank you so much, Kay.
Very much so.
Cara, do you want to say anything about Solomon?
I do. Just quickly, Gordon, if you can get a hold of Divine Providence, Swedenborg's book, Divine Providence, and look at number 245, that has an interesting layout about Solomon. And the first thing it says that is fascinating to me is that Solomon was permitted to establish idolatrous forms of worship so that he might represent the Lord's kingdom or the church together with all the religious practices observed throughout the world. That's pretty cool. And then it talks about Solomon. So David represents the Lord who would come into the world, and Solomon represents the Lord after he came into the world. And because he represented the Lord with all that glorified glory, that's why Solomon in his earthly life was surrounded by glory and magnificence and wealth more than any other king in the world, because he represented the fully glorified state of Jesus Christ after the resurrection. I
think that's awesome that you had that on hand as well. I knew it'd be good having the both of you here. This touches on what I feel like is a complicated but essential piece of Swedenborg's theology, which is about the nature of the people that are in the Bible. And Chelsea, you touched on this. I just want to repeat some of that and expand on it, which is that it's all symbolic. We just did a News from Heaven episode where we talked about how the Bible has a body and a soul. And the story about people like Solomon, that's the body. The soul, where you actually find the Lord's love, where you find God, is the meaning within that. So that what Solomon represented, that is what it's all about. So we're not meant to see the Bible and say, well, I guess this is God putting out examples of how I should live my life. It's not one-to-one that you see somebody in the Bible and you look at their decisions and you would mimic those. You got to learn, there's some moral lessons you can glean out of it, but really this is about learning what is it talking about within me. And also the people that were representing those things didn't even have to be great people. There are some very well-beloved people in the Bible that Swedenborg writes about meeting in the afterlife and saying, they weren't actually that good. They were kind of puffed up with pride at their role in the biblical events. So it's really, the Bible was intended to be this document that is a working document for all humanity all the time. This is really the importance of it, is to get to you this correspondential blueprint for how you work and how you relate to God and everything. And all the stories, all the events and actions and characters are means to that end. It's not meant to be God endorsing the ways in which it's described that they lived, which I think is important, because what's that saying? There's no one in the Old Testament you'd want your child to grow up to be. Right? There's a lot of bad behavior and not that much good behavior. So I think it's so critical to see the Bible in that way, because it immediately frees you from this moral conundrum that I see in this question. It's like, Solomon is really good, but what was he doing having like a bunch of wives? Like, is that good? So I like the question, and thank you, Chelsea and Cara, for those answers. We got to keep going. We got to keep on going. We just got an anonymous gift. and the donor wanted to add it to our matching gift total. So it was a $500 anonymous gift. So now we're up at $2,037. Thank you so much, everybody. This is like
Wow.
way cooler than I thought things could turn out here. So offtheLeftEye.com/donate. Careful, that like webpage is probably burning up right now from how many people are going to it. All right, let's do another one. Thank you, Gordon, for that great question. The next question is from Matt Klein. Hi, Matt. Swedenborg describes Jesus as the divine human, being human in physical presence, but his soul was God. Did Swedenborg say how Jesus knew who he was? Is it something that dawned on him? Did he always know? I guess he was a baby. He couldn't have known then, right? How did Jesus come to realize, oh, I'm God? So what do you think, Chelsea or Cara?
Yeah, what comes to my mind is the episode we did a while back called The Psychology of Jesus. Because what stuck in my mind from that was, well, first of all, again, we're sort of talking about how sort of amazing the Bible is when you look at it correspondentially, the way Swedenborg describes, but it's like you've got these patriarchs, and, anyway, yes, they're patriarchs, even though, yes, they had wives too, and there are matriarchs there. But anyway, the representation's coming through this patriarchal line here. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, etc., Joseph. Anyway, you have those represent these stages in Jesus's development, and so then in our spiritual development, and going through the whole process of spiritual growth. I mean, it's just amazing and has sort of infinite depth, and that's why Swedenborg wrote Secrets of Heaven. But the Abraham part is, and I don't have like the exact words, but Swedenborg describes Jesus waking up to this like little like inner inclination of just this like love, this like divine love in him that sort of, kind of perked his eyes up at some point. So, Swedenborg says that Jesus developed, went through human development, but did it, whatever, faster and like, completely or something. So it like, he's described as being super knowledgeable when he's really young. But so somewhere in that time, it was like his inner self kind of woke up and he had this experience of love. And then there was just this drive to go find the knowledge that love needed to live its journey. And then it goes through struggle. And then, then there's this connection of the outer self to that inner self, to that love that's been calling him. And so in Jesus, it was the divine itself, divine love itself. And so that, so Swedenborg basically describes that he kind of woke up to it and then knew that there was this divine love leading him. And where did he go to get his, to fill his mind with his earthly mind with the knowledge that it needed, but studying the ancient sacred texts, of the Bible. And so, but understanding it as this, code for, he just experienced the spiritual truth that was encoded in that. And so that sort of goes back to like, well, how did he first know who he was? And then, that connection with learning and cultivating, and experiencing this connection with the divine love in him was something that, like developed and progressed over the course of his lifetime that maybe Curtis and Cara can talk more about. But I just have not forgotten that amazing sort of early insight of like, kind of like your inner self just wakes you up, starts coming through to get your attention. Yeah.
That's so cool. I love the picture that you paint of that love coming in and it suddenly, where's my truth? Where's my partner truth that I need to find? And also how you describe Jesus go into the Bible really gave me this image of Jesus didn't take a private plane. But he rode in coach like the rest of us do. The things that Jesus does, we do. It just, he did it on this different scale because just he needed to go learn. He had to go learn from the Word, and this is what we're trying to do. But also, I bet that awesome process that you were describing of the inner self and then discovering the divine love and discovering that he was divine is probably just like what we go through, but instead of discovering that we are God, we discover the intimacy of our partnership, that the life that's within us comes from God. I bet we do like a mini version of that same thing. Cara, do you want to say anything about the divine human?
Yeah, Chill, thanks for saying what you said. I knew there was something in the Arcana about that. That's the story of Jesus's inner development on the spiritual level. But the thing that comes to my mind is when Jesus was on the road to Emmaus, right after his crucifixion and after he came back to see the disciples, and he's telling these two disciples that are going, what the heck has been happening? And they don't know they're talking to Jesus. And he expounds to them how all the scriptures, all the Old Testament were about him. And I mean, just what a mind-blowing place to be in. So I don't know how, what that process was like exactly. The Arcana does try to talk about that, Secrets of Heaven. But the fact that at the his very last message to anybody while he was still walking the earth, it's all about me, friends. It's all about me. All that, which didn't include the New Testament. That's the thing I have to get in mind.
Yeah.
He's talking about the Old Testament, all the old scriptures. So,
Man, just like I was just saying, well, who else is the Old Testament all about? Us.
yeah, right.
That is because God is. We are human because God is. So I'm not trying to say that Jesus wasn't God. It wasn't this unique phenomenon. But he, in living the life that he lived, like paved this trail that we now walk down each in our own little way. Because that's what Swedenborg was trying to get across: is go look at Genesis. It's about you. It's about what goes on inside you, and simultaneously, in the highest sense, is what goes on inside the Lord, because the Lord is just doing it on an infinite scale. Man, that's great.
Yeah, it's fun to like the question of like, does Swedenborg say how Jesus knew who he was? It's such an interesting question, but in sort of that simplest turn, I sort of think it's like, because love knows how to like find the truth that will reflect itself to itself. Like we all have this love in us that can use what's out here in order to hold it up and see love looking back at us, and like that's what God did. He found that love looking back, and then we experience that love, like you're saying, Curtis, too.
Yeah. Hopefully it was fun. Hopefully it was an exciting discovery. I feel like I could be a lot of weight, like, oh wow, I've got a lot to do now. And yeah, but hopefully it was a good day when he discovered that.
Good day.
Hey, everyone's gonna get tired of me saying this, but we got another $500 anonymous gift.
Whoa!
Thank you.
What?
Thank you for believing that what we're doing is important and worth putting your resources into. So we appreciate that and take it as a responsibility, a sacred responsibility to put it to good use and try to accomplish good in the world. Thank you. And then I want to say thanks to Jeff, who made a donation after that. Thank you so much, Jeff. Appreciate it. Hey, let's see if we can squeak one more question in. Wow, we're almost at the end of the hour. What's the next question? Let's get it up there. Are we spirits in heaven before we are born? This is from True Lee. And I don't think I know of any referencing to pre-existence in Swedenborg other than the idea that each of us are supposed to become a desire, one of God's desires manifested, which I think those would exist beforehand. But I don't know. What do you think, Cara, Chelsea?
No, it's a good.
Yeah, it's a very popular concept these days. but Swedenborg doesn't talk about it. As far as I know, I mean, as I understand it, he implies that our spirit begins at conception. You know, when there's a human being there that's a vessel for a new life, that's the beginning. And then that spirit is eternal, but
Yeah.
it has a finite beginning, which is what differentiates us from God. God being infinite, no beginning, no end everywhere.
Right.
We have a finite beginning and then we last forever. That's how I understand it.
Yeah, makes me think. I think it was at the beginning of this show, way back when, that I was expressing wonder at what Swedenborg says, but I also have wonder about this, that are we spirits in heaven before we are born? I mean, like, to the letter, no, like that's not, I mean, Swedenborg doesn't say that, like what Kara is saying, that there's this, like the way that it helps me, or that I've found like interesting stuff to chew over in Swedenborg, is just what the kind of amazingness of developing our spiritual bodies, like that's a thing that has to develop spiritually, like, and it's made out of love and wisdom. And so we have this, we are these vessels, and then we're these unique images of and vessels of love and wisdom. And so there's this whole intricate process that we go through to develop that through our lives. And I think that's why human development is such an amazing thing to study, and like psychology and how do we grow, and everything. But I think what I find so interesting is, it's not like we're detached from a spiritual lineage, when we get a vessel, like we have tails, kind of, you could say, that go obviously through our parents, but then, just sort of infinitely out into the spiritual reality. And there's something, like there's some kind of wisdom in that, I think. And like, so it makes me wonder about, women who have they sometimes can know who they're conceiving, or like they feel like they're being asked, like, for a spirit to come and, that wants to be born into the world. Like there's something going on in terms of like that spiritual wisdom, like that omniscience or something that we get to be in partnership with as we live in this spiritual reality where we have this little bit of consciousness about it. So it's like, I remember like really early on when I was pregnant with my first, like I had a dream of this child, looking at me in the face. And it's like, was that her spirit or not? There's just like sort of amazing things that can happen. And so I almost want to say it's kind of like, sort of like a both and, if I can be so annoying to say that. there's this like spiritual connection that is happening, and yet there's something completely new being created, and it's this new vessel of love and wisdom that's going to have this experience of itself and go on that journey of love finding itself, in through truth, and and that just gets to happen, again and again. So I don't know. Cool stuff. Lots of good questions for when we get there.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, I love it. I love pondering those mysteries, and I think it's a great point, Chelsea, about the lineage that goes back. And if you just even think physically, like, where did you come from? Well, you were pulled out of the DNA of two existing people. You didn't just spring out of nothing. So in a way, you were already there. I do think of something interesting that Swedenborg says about when you reach your spiritual community, is that he says it feels like you're back to your birthplace, or like you've come home. Mm-hmm. So and there's also like you come into all the knowledge of the community you belong to, and it seems as though you already knew it. So I could certainly see where people would get the impression that you have existed before. And yeah, I guess there's probably all kinds of nuance on it, even if Swedenborg doesn't seem to endorse you had a pre-birth. And I think for the reason that you mentioned, Chelsea, that spiritual things have to have structure, and there really does need to be this initial building of what it is to be a spirit, that you couldn't like take a fully formed spirit and then cram it into there, although there is the potential in God already. Okay, cool. Let's leave it there. I just want to say that we got everything that everyone gave. Then we had that matching gift that I told you about in the beginning of $250 from our sponsors. So when we add that on, we've raised $2,837. That's got to be a record for one of these shows. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate that. If you're watching after the fact and you feel like I couldn't get in on the fun, you can still go to offtheLeftEye.com/donate, and all throughout tomorrow, which is actually Giving Tuesday, it will still go to our Giving Tuesday total. Thanks, everybody. 19 people contributed today. Oh, actually 21, looks like. That's touching. And I just want to say I enjoyed so much, Cara and Chelsea, your sharing your thoughts and wisdom today. That was truly a treat for me. Thanks, both of you, for coming on the program.
Thank you for having us, Curtis. I have to say that my takeaway from this evening is this sense of wonder. You know, all these questions are the biggest questions, and we just don't know the answers. We're just little human beings having this tiny, tiny experience of the vast spiritual reality. So this sense of wonder and awe, and sometimes I think there's something even more exciting about not knowing the answer, because we just get to like sort of fall into God's arms, and he's going to take care of us somehow, even if we don't get it. So anyway, thank you so much for your contributions and for being with us tonight. Jill?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Cara, hearing you say that reminds me of something my kids say, like one of those, they call us a human being, like B-E-A-N. I don't know, I just love that. Oh, it's a human being. Yeah. Anyway, so we are all just little human beings, and which is great. And Curtis, maybe you're going to say this, but I'm just aware of, like, for all the other questions that we didn't get to, our lovely community care team moderators will be excited to respond offline or off live. Yeah, I'm really grateful to be here and to get to hang out with the two of you and with everybody watching, to share in this spiritual reflection. I always feel very fed by it, so I'm grateful.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great point. Put your questions, if we didn't get to them, put them in the comment section, or if you have them after the fact, and we'll get to them. And I think that description you gave, Cara, of when there's such big questions, and someday we get to kind of fall into the arms of the divine, and divine will show us what's going on. We'll always have that feeling, though, of, oh, there's so much more to know, because as Swedenborg says, it is wisdom to see that what you know is next to nothing compared to what you do not know. It doesn't matter how much let's say we go to heaven and we can see things there. There's always so much more to learn, that there's always this state of mystery and wonder. So you can't blame us for not knowing all the details, because you never know all the details. That's all I'm saying. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night, and thanks again for all the support.